How about instead of desperately trying to fix anxiety, we learn how to journey with it in a soulful, spiritual way? This week's episode is with Sasha Archer. Sasha is a great friend, an incredible creatrix, and a hands on healer. We explore Sasha's profound journey of understanding and healing anxiety through earth based spirituality. Sasha reflects on her early experiences with anxiety that began back in childhood, the impact it had on her life, and the pivotal moments that led her to explore healing beyond the mainstream. We discuss the significance of intuition and synchronicity, reflect on the healing power of the earth, and emphasize the importance of inclusivity and accessibility in healing practices. And before we dive into all of that good stuff, if you are struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world and you would benefit from guidance, support, and kinship, please join us in our Academy of the Soul Unio. You can find out more by hopping on over to bemythical.com/Unio or click the link in the description. And now let's dive into the show. Hello, Sasha. What a delight it is to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, what a pleasure. What a pleasure. We've had many conversations before. We were just reflecting, most of them sitting around a fire, often eating some aloo gobi. So this is just an extension of those conversations in some way, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, my dear, I know you have a really rich and I guess somewhat mythical, ultimately all of our stories are mythical in their own way, but mythical story of understanding and experiencing anxiety differently through how and I'm going to kind of use my own language for this. You feel free to talk about this in your own way, through your connection and reclamation with what we might call earth-based spirituality in all of its different forms.
Yeah.
And I'd love to start with when you started to experience anxiety and what was going on for you then, how that was showing up for you.
Okay. So, it began when I was really young, to be honest. I think my first memory of feeling anxious was around the age of 9. Only I didn't know that it was anxiety. So I'd lived with it for years. And then I got to university and I remember going to the doctors quite frequently and saying to them that my head's fizzing, my lips are vibrating, my heart's beating too quickly. I kept saying, you need to check my blood sugars because I'm
So you didn't think it was anxiety
No,
at
I
that point?
couldn't
No.
name it. I didn't, because I'd lived with it for so long. It was just a feeling that was really natural to me until it came to the point that my face felt like it was tingling all the time. And I'd go to the doctors and I'd say, I think I need to have my blood sugars taken. My family, I've got a history of diabetes in the family. And I assumed that I was feeling off kilter because my blood sugars were wrong or something. So that went on for a few years, me going back to the doctors. And then they kept saying to me, have you got anything stressful going on in your life? Have you got anything that you're worried about? And I was just like, no, it didn't seem any more difficult than it had been before. It was just something, like I said, that I'd been used to living with. And then it got to a point when I'd had my first daughter, my first child, 11 years ago. And that's when I really recognised that there was something wrong. And it took for my husband to tell me, like, this isn't normal and I think you need to get some help. But I think I would have carried on as I was, just believing it was part of life. Until
How
someone
is it
told
showing
me.
up? Yeah, well, sometimes we absolutely need those reflections. And sometimes when it's the most obvious things, they can be hidden in plain sight. How is that showing up in terms of the choices you made, how you were living your life, what you would, whether you'd go out, socialize, work, how was it affecting those things?
yeah, what it changed, really, throughout the time. So there would be times when I'd manage to get myself out the house, but before I could, I'd have to go and have a little chat with myself. I'd spend 10 minutes crying alone in the bathroom and giving myself a pep talk, and then I'd get out. And I think I'd carried on like that for years and just managed. And then like I said, when I got to about 11 years ago, that's when it became quite debilitating. I couldn't function, and everything became tricky. So even making a cup of tea, walking to the kettle, it was like my brain, my thoughts, my body had disconnected, and I'd have to really talk myself through the process of like, right, we've just got to do a step, get to the kettle, fill it up with water. It was everything just slowed down, and it was absolutely exhausting. So I'd have to sleep, and I'd find myself falling asleep all the time. And I think that's when I realised it was bad. I went upstairs one day and I had to just sort the laundry out. And my husband came upstairs and I'd fallen asleep by the laundry bin, just like with the sheets.
Oh, bless you.
I'm just exhausted from having to overthink all the time by that time.
But a real saving grace in a way. There's such wisdom, isn't there, in our bodies, in the if that hadn't happened, I'm guessing it could have been even more damaging.
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
you almost needed that break through sleeping, through resting.
Yeah, it's my body protecting itself, just shutting down and saying it's time to stop. So
Yeah. So then what happened next?
So that's when I realised that there was something off, and I was really trying to put my finger on it. And I had this sensation as a child that I'd have this light from above. So I'd lay down in bed and I would just somehow manage to get myself perfectly aligned. I felt like I would just be straight in bed. This light would come down and it would pass through me and pass through my feet, and I would just have this sense of calm. And then when I fell pregnant with my daughter, my stomach grew. So before I'd done a pregnancy test, I felt my stomach glowing and I was like, oh, I think I'm pregnant. And then after having her, that light disappeared. I mean, I could put it down to loads of things, but I had a really traumatic birth with her, and I'd wonder whether that was part of it. But yeah, the light disappeared. So I was like, the first step was to try to find this light again. So I decided to do my Reiki training. And that was my first step. I tried Reiki, and that sort of opened me up to realizing that there was something more and then something else that I could tap into to help myself, but it didn't help me heal the anxiety.
But it was more like we were talking before we started recording. We were talking about these like breadcrumbs that we find on our soul path and how they show us kind of the next step, and it feels like that in some ways was one of those breadcrumbs for you. It
Definitely.
it wasn't the answer, and yet it was a valuable breadcrumb that sort of showed you something about yourself.
Yeah, just even the process of remembering that light. I think that was really important. And then trying to get it and then trying to reclaim it. And yeah, just remembering that realizing that there was something else. That's, really important.
So what was the next breadcrumb?
So random. I had a telephone call out of the blue, well, a message out of the blue actually, from an old university friend of mine. And I hadn't spoken to her for 10 years. And I remember the message coming through because it was I was in bed again, just trying to find some peace. And I had this message, and she works as a crystal healer, and we'd both studied footwear design together. So it was quite a big change.
Footwear designer to crystal healer.
We're both footwear designers. And she got in touch and told me to work with Labradorites and that she was now working shamanically. And I was like, what's shame? I had no idea at this time what shamanism was. I'd never really worked that much with crystals. I had like the quartz and the rose quartz and bits around because they looked beautiful, but not really had that connection with them. So she sent that message, And she pretty much disappeared again. But
I love that. That's so, that in itself is just so part of these like mythical tales evolve. This like sort of like someone just appearing with this profound piece of the puzzle, this piece of wisdom or this gift, and then just disappearing again.
Yeah, it was just like the messenger dropped in. They went and got the Labradorite. And then I think I spent possibly a whole week. I know it was definitely no less than 3 to 4 nights of going to bed and just laying there with the Labradorite on my third eye and asking for this wisdom. Actually, missed a bit out. Before that, I was starting to. I'd always been quite in tune as a child, so I would have visions and hear messages, but I pushed it away because it's terrifying as a kid, and it's not comfortable to live with or see. And between the Reiki and this Labradorite, I'd started.
Can I just jump in there, because I think that's something so important. And I see this show up over and over again because of the work we do. Is very often people like you and I who, without really consciously knowing it, are more open, more sensitive, let's say. And we tend to have, it could be experiences like that you've just described, or show up in ways that we kind of might, describe as, say, anxiety or OCD, or all these different ways that we can struggle in a modern world that doesn't understand these differences. But also, we have no guides to show us the meaning of those things, the context of these things, like who we really are and how these things can be gifts. And it understandably means we actually do our best to kind of shut those things down, not understanding that's going to have a price to pay too. And again, it's all done in complete innocence and as a way of keeping ourselves safe. But there's a point at which that takes its toll, and that kind of like shutting down, trying not to hear that kind of wisdom is wisdom clearly that we need. But in a world where none of this is understood, we aren't guided and shown what these things mean, and again, what that means for us personally in terms of our soul path. It again, it's only as we start to find our way onto some kind of path that has language and understanding of these things that it also, we can sort of like connect the dots looking back and go, oh, that's what was happening. But these aren't the conversations that most children are surrounded by, sadly.
No, I was quite fortunate in some respects that my mum and my nan were really into spiritualism. So I had the opportunity to say, if these visions arrive, but sometimes I just didn't bother because I was just, closed it off. Just I felt like it's something I had to deal with alone, which is really weird. But and it is interesting to, as you're saying, that it does end up becoming, it's your gift, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, please do go on. I interrupted you. So
no, that's okay. So I can't remember where I was.
You're saying about those visions and voices coming back, I think.
Yeah. So they started, but again, because I was in that state of feeling anxious, sometimes I was like, am I going mad? Where's it coming from? So that actually increased the anxiety. It was always a bit of a dance with healing myself and feeling like I was going crazy because I wasn't quite grounded and stable enough to manage what was coming through at that time.
Yeah.
So, then I worked with the Labradorite and asked for visions and wisdom. I just think I was asking for the wisdom to help heal myself, and I was working with the tarot cards and things like that. And then I decided to look into what shamanism meant, and I just laid there with my headphones in and listened to YouTube videos of shamanic drum tracks, and I'd set my intention to find out what, like, the root of the anxiety, where it was coming from. And I would just get that information and then be like, okay, now that makes sense. What's the next step? And I'll just carry on like that.
Would you give an example of the kind of things that you might have been shown in those journeys?
Yeah. So the first thing, oh gosh, there's lots. I did some crazy questions as well because I was feeling really lost. I was feeling so lost at the time. I was like, what's my sole purpose was one of my questions. And I've probably mentioned this to you before. And then I was guided to do all this work with my ancestors and psychopomp. And I was like, oh gosh, like, no thank you.
Not that.
What's my other sole purpose? The pretty one, please.
Yeah, I'll have the other one, please.
Well, I'll begin it with the anxiety. One of the things that I found actually, and going back to being sensitive, is that actually from childhood, I had almost made it subconsciously made it my job to help heal those around me. So the anxiety that I was feeling was partly mine, but a lot of it was what I'd absorbed from things that were happening in the family and stories I was hearing about the family and wanting to help them. So I guess that's just, like the role of a healer, isn't it? But as a child, you don't know that. And I just felt like I had this layering of all these other people's problems on top of mine, and it had just got too much. But then when I understood that, I realized that I don't have to carry their problems, and they weren't mine. And that just was a really defining moment. I was like, oh, that's actually not my anxiety. That's not my issue. I'll leave that behind. And now I can just focus on what is mine.
Yeah, that's huge. Yes. So continue on from, you started to do these journeys and get guidance. And then where did that take you?
Well, initially I feel like I spent every night journaling, and I would either do a journey or I would do, every time I go to say this, I forget the name, the free writing, where I would put myself into like a trance state, and at the top of the page, I would write down what I wanted to discover about myself, and then I would just respond to myself. And I found that so insightful. And I did that for a couple of years, and then everything started that going back to that what's my sole purpose thing, all of that sort of thing with the ancestors and my guides, and that started to show up. And that then, when it moved away from being about me to something bigger, I started to wobble again because I didn't know how to manage that. And then I did a shamanic practitioner training to help me understand that side of things.
So if we pause or return back and look at that phase before that side of things, you say, which is, a lot to be with. When we start to see dead people, we know perhaps this is something I might need some help with. But before that started happening, what had been the impact on your anxiety, both in terms of the symptoms, but also how that impacted how you lived your life? My sense is, just from what I know of you, you had seen some real changes because of your practices, but I'd love to know your sense of that.
Yeah, so I started to be able to see, like I was saying, where it was and wasn't mine, so what I could let go of and what I had to deal with. I managed to, working with spirit, I managed to figure out how to keep myself grounded and how to really tap into the energy of anxiety. So most recently I've discovered, so I always used to sit and ask myself where I was feeling it. Is it in my head? Is it in my heart? Is it in my womb space? And what's the message from this anxiety? Because it's often that I'm just out of alignment and I need to bring something into balance, and I'm feeling frustrated or upset, and it's causing my brain to go a little bit off. So, saying that being my brain, the recent revelation I've had is that actually I'm starting to feel the anxiety as something separate to myself, if that makes sense. It's not always, I've been seeing it and feeling it as the energy and being able to clear that energy rather than feeling it something that's I'm embodying. If does that make sense?
It completely makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm.
So now when it's coming, if I feel myself, tipping over to feeling anxious, I check it with the body, see where it is, and then I just clear the energy of it, as well as understanding what I need to do to create the change to get rid of it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So my sense of you, and this could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it isn't, is that, like me, you had this, I guess you could say, intuitive or instinctive draw to the wild, to nature, to trees, to pieces of land, and to work in a way that, we might see. Again, you and I did the shamanic practitioners training together, and for me it was so interesting to see the things that I've just intuitively been doing for years, making offerings to the land, having that really strong connection with the tree, that no one had told me to do that. Well, no one externally, as in terms of another human being. These were just things that made sense, I was called to do. And then it was as we were in that training, I was like, oh, these are kind of things that have ancient roots. These are things that, we are now being taught to do, but I was just doing anyway. And it wouldn't have made sense for me not to do them. My sense of you is you had a similar intuitive calling to those types of practices and rituals. I'd love to hear your sense of that.
Yeah. So that, we were saying about when I was going into those journeys, one of the first things that I was guided to do was to give my worries away. So when I was like, well, what's next? And I was told, you just need to give your worries away, give it to the earth. And honestly, at this point, I was like, again, thinking, this is madness, like absolute madness. But said to the family, we're going now. I've got to go and give my worries to the earth. So I made a note and shared all the things that I needed to clear from my life. And I wrapped it in a little parcel with my offering. And again, saying about how you intuitively do things, I put a coin in there, a little bit of dark chocolate that I desperately wanted for myself. I was like, just didn't want to share it at all, but that went in.
Always the best kind of offerings.
Yeah. And I can't remember, there was a few things that went into that first parcel, and I tied it up in a little bundle. And I was guided to go and put this parcel in the earth, or give my worries to the earth, and to go to a specific tree and collect an acorn. So, as you can imagine, I was like, this is wild. But I did as I was told. And still to this day, the things, that you do naturally, I still sometimes question it, although I do know it works and it's beautiful. So yeah, I handed over the offering. I went to the tree, and I had been shown really clearly which tree it was to be. And as I walked to the tree, the other oak trees surrounding it didn't have any acorns. I was like, I've come at the wrong time of year. I don't know if when at this, I was like, do acorns even drop now? So I carried on to the tree that I was supposed to go to, and underneath, it was just loads of acorns. So I was like, oh my goodness, it felt really, just clear that I was supposed to do that. So I got the acorn, and I was guided to make a pouch and to carry this with me. And at the time I was still shoemaking, so I had, funnily enough, a little bit of oak tanned leather at home. So I made a pouch out of oak tanned leather, put the acorn in it, and then I started to get really strong visions of this tree. And I'd be doing the washing up, and the tree would come into my mind, or the song would start to come out, like the song would come out of my mouth, and then I'd see the tree, and I was like, this is too much.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I was like, this is too much. But it actually really helped begin that relationship with going to the oak, and I still go there. And if there's times that I feel, I need to talk to somebody, or I need some guidance, I just go and sit there in silence and wait. And I still take the offerings. And I think that relationship, there's something more to this as well, actually, is that what it taught me was that it should be, I think I've mentioned this to you before, it's like that sense of being mothered by the mother, like the earth, and going to and the first note that I wrote, instinctively I just signed it, your child. And I remember writing that thinking, what on earth? Like, what is that? And I didn't understand that until that relationship started to build. And I was like, oh, like we are all the children of the earth. We are all protected and we are all looked after. But we don't get the opportunity to always see that and realise that.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And there was a point in your story that I wanted to ask you a question, but I had a sense like, oh, hang on. And you've actually brought it really beautifully back to this. My own experience and that of guiding students along this path is that particularly it's not that it stops necessarily, but particularly in the early days where we're still like on those kind of Bambi legs, finding our way back to this understanding of ourselves and our place in the way of things, is that we're often shown things that are so undeniable, like the example you gave where you were guided that particular oak and it was the one that had acorns and the others weren't. And I personally had so many examples of things like that, and again heard stories from students where it's like we are given something so beautiful, so undeniable, so supportive, so guiding, so that it's like gives us that sense of confidence, like I can trust this is real. I'm not alone in all of this, which I think that in itself, that feeling of I'm not alone, which, I see as a human birthright to like know that we belong.
Definitely.
We belong in our community. We belong and the community isn't just a community of people. I mean, wish we all had that, but it's not just a community of people. It's a community of all of the beings around us. It's a community that includes the earth, the sun, everything, and know that we belong. We're meant to be there. We belong, loved. And I think in those early stages where we haven't been told that by our culture or our parents, it's like we are shown that in ways that are so unmistakable that even though we'll have those doubts come up and like, this is just so out there, we can't doubt it. Like we have to know, like this can't have just been coincidence. As I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because that feels such a special part of your story, but it's something I see over and over again. Like if we can just take that first little scared step, we will be shown what's next.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think, just when you were just talking, I was thinking that it's the whole thing about we're not shown in our culture to build that relationship, and the idea of that we take care of the land and it takes care of us. We're just missing that. We really are. And yeah, you nearly made me cry then because I was just thinking, oh, if everyone had this, then how different the world could be. Yeah. So we're back, to the idea of being shown things. It happens all the time, and I think we were talking about this recently, but it's trusting those synchronicities as well, isn't it? Like you really need to just trust that, because I still struggled for years, even though it was being shown to me so clearly. I still had doubts, but now, I just allow it to unfold and trust it. And I think the more you pray and set your intentions out there, and you see those responses to it, the easier it is to begin to trust it, isn't it?
Yes. What you've just called to mind, I've done a couple of podcast episodes recently with my old mentor who works very archetypally. And we were talking about those kind of four main Jungian archetypes. So the sort of queen stroke, king stroke, sovereign, the warrior, magician, and lover. And in the way that he works, which I think is a really profound way of understanding our psyches, is the magician in most people who, let's face it, for most people in this modern world are very disconnected from anything really than that kind of very small, what we might sort of say like ego self, and
Yeah.
feel very alone, feel scared. And that magician part of their psyche is used to analyze, to control, to be vigilant. And so it's doing its best to keep us safe, but it's working in this kind of very skeptical way, where all the time it's looking for like, oh no, that's not true, I won't believe that, I need to do this to keep myself safe. And then the beautiful thing is, as we do the work to come back to ourselves, back to a place of sovereignty, that magician part of us, which, we might have our own language, we might have it called it the witch part or the priestess part, but that
Yeah.
part that is undeniably like able to work magically, then is able to work in service in a way that does allow us to see those synchronicities and know they're meaningful. It
Yeah.
allows us to do the rituals that connect us to spirit. And it is so beautiful how that same part that was used to kind of keep us away from spirit starts to be able to like actively, consciously work in these beautifully magical ways. And what you've just said really reminded me of that. It's like that part of us that's meant to like firstly keep myself, like I must just dismiss it as coincidence. And then it's like, oh, but it's synchronicity. And what's
Yeah.
that showing me?
Yeah. And it just keeps you growing, doesn't it? You can keep learning and
Yes,
following
never
those
ending.
next steps.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, what I'd like to turn our thoughts to now, and this is a conversation you and I were in last time we spoke, which is there's, I'm just trying to simplify where I'm going with this. So, there's people like yourself where much of your experiences when they were showing up in a anxiety way, a negative way, a scary way, were because you are part of your soul path is to be a healer. And so the two things were intrinsically linked. It was a lack of understanding of your gifts and how to use them was part of the source of the anxiety, and therefore understanding yourself is part of allowing those things to heal and be used in service. However, it's whilst, clearly not everyone's soul path is to be a healer, whatever way we want to describe that. And of course, we could broaden this out to, it could be a shaman or it could be a spiritual teacher. There's lots of ways to work, magically and spiritually, but not everyone's path is to do that. We need people who are going to be accountants and bakers and gardeners and all the rest of things too.
Yeah.
However, my sense is, and this is something I do strongly believe, and have seen evidence to suggest this is the case. Many of the things we're talking about, that deep connection with the land, with spirit, with ourselves, is something that is serving to anyone, and particularly if it's showing, that disconnection is showing up in ways such as anxiety. The fundamental principles we've been talking about are here for all of us, not just people who is kind of showing up in a particularly what we might call shamanic sickness, this kind of very extreme way. Much of what we've spoken about, my sense is, applies to everyone, is here for everyone. But I'd love to hear your sense on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's it would be beautiful if we could all embrace that and go back to that. And I think it would just bring people into balance. And I think I'm starting to see. So I'm in Leicestershire, and we have a really big community of people that do healing work, or host women's circles, drum circles, and things like that. And over the time I've been here, I'm seeing an increase in people coming out and gathering together in community. And I think it's needed. People crave it, but they don't know where to find it, really. So I think, yeah, we need more people out there offering it and making people aware that it's not bonkers to be doing this. I think it's, for me, I'm really passionate about healing being accessible to everybody if they want it. And but just mentioned to you earlier that I feel like really called to start a community interest company, a project whereby I can offer that to more people. But I was wondering, to begin with, it's just maybe about bringing everyone together in community so that they feel held, and bringing them into awareness of the cycles and how they're connected to that. So that's one avenue that I feel like I'm going to go down eventually, like hopefully very soon, is helping. I think, and also I feel like that's quite accessible to people. If you start telling them that we're going to do these big journeys and we're going to connect with spirit and do this work, I think it can put people off. So I'm really interested in bringing healing to others and bringing people in relationship with the land, and then like bringing them together in a community, but in a way that feels safe for them, and then hopefully building their appreciation and knowledge of working with spirit, and then they can take that direction if they wish. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And again, I think in some ways, what struck me as you were replying there is, I think this is it's so interwoven with just who you are and how you show up. I think there is a kind of, for you, it's like almost like, of course, like, why wouldn't we do this in a way that works for everyone?
Yeah, it's interesting that you should say that, because I do feel really comfortable with just being in the community and working with people in that way. And I am passionate about making it accessible to everyone, just making everyone feel, because I think, as you picked up there, it's the background that I came from, and I know that I didn't have access to the support when I needed it. So I want to offer that to other people, because as you mentioned, it is quite elitist. And one of the big reasons that my anxiety picked up was that I'd lost my job. So I didn't have the finances to get the teachers. And now I can see it as a blessing, because I had to teach myself, and it made my connection with spirit stronger. But I didn't have the money to get the teachers. I couldn't go on retreat weekends. It wasn't easy at the time. And I just feel like I can really relate to people in that situation.
Yeah, I think it is so important, and something that increasingly I'm noticing is something we need to consciously include in conversations like this. Again, because it's, I think when it's something that seems obvious to us, and again, one of my values is exactly that, making these things accessible for the people it's aligned for. So one of the ways we do that is with our Academy Unio, where we have it in a way that is accessible for all different incomes. And it's very intentional. I mean, the very reason we offer the whole thing in the first place isn't really from it's unlikely to ever be something that's like a sensible business decision. But it is very intentionally created in that way to be accessible to anyone who is on their soul path, kind of no matter where they are and who they are, and, how many resources they have. But I think it's important that we remind ourselves that, this is actually an important thing to bring into conversations, to bring into people's awareness, because it's something, again, again, it's just human nature, whatever the thing is, whether it be shamanism, whether it be spirituality, whether it be community, we have this conditioned response to kind of make it this kind of elitist, capitalist, materialist thing. And I'm not saying that from a place of making that wrong or being judgmental. It's just a fact. It's just kind of like part of our human condition right now in this modern world. And so there is an important thing to consciously bring the other into the conversation too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but that being said, I found that it is difficult to not. I think the society that, if that's what the place, the world that we're living in at the moment, makes it difficult to not have to bring money into the conversation about it. Like, I've spent this last year trying to I've been offering women's circles and doing group healing work, because I thought that's a way that, so I've set an intention and a theme for that month, and then anyone that feels aligned, then it's right for them to come along to, I don't know, we've had one that we've worked through childhood. I think I've done an anxiety one. The next one that's coming up is about staying grounded. So we can come along together and we do a little bit of journeying and then sharing, to make it more affordable for people, really, to do it in that group setting. But yeah, I've struggled this last year to find a way to keep myself afloat.
Which is also important. Yes, absolutely.
Hence thinking I've got to do the community project so I can bring that to everyone. Yeah.
But I think that's such a great example. It's not as though there isn't a kind of nice, neat, easy answer on any of this. I think it's more about, let's stay in the contemplation and conversation, because it's, yeah, I think as soon as we think there is an easy answer, it's probably the wrong one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as we are coming up on time, is there anything else you feel is important to mention in terms of, again, going back to our original themes of this conversation around anxiety? And we said at the start, it's not necessarily about overcoming anxiety in the way that we typically might see it. For you, it's very much more about understanding anxiety and kind of like experiencing it in a way where it isn't debilitating. It is able to be something you can work with, understand, and it's not limiting how you live your life in unbeneficial ways, let's say. And of course, these themes of it being about this connection to land, to connection to spirit. Is there anything else coming back to that you feel is important to say?
Yeah, I think that it's important to find a way to give yourself the time. You know, when you're going through those feelings, give yourself the time to sit with them and not. I think that's another problem with our modern living at the moment, is there's no space for most people to give yourself the time to just sit with those feelings and let them pass and get to understand them. And I think that's why anxiety, feelings of anxiety escalate, because we're just layering it up, one thing on top of another, and not giving it the time and attention to allowing that energy to come in and pass through. Because I feel like, well, I've been experiencing recently, that's really what's needed, is just to feel it for what it is and to let it pass. But we can't always honour that.
Yeah, the real wisdom there. Often the idea of something is so scary when actually, when we are able to open and be intimate with it, it turns out it isn't this big monster that we thought it was.
And it's also, just important, I feel, just to keep asking yourself, why are you feeling that feeling, and where does that come from, and just keep taking it back and finding that root cause. Because I think once you've named that root cause, it's easy to diminish the feelings of anxiety, or just reduce them, because you know it's not actually the thing. It's not always what you think it is.
Yes, yes, very well said.
Yeah.
Sasha, where can people find out about you and your wonderful work?
Okay, so I've got a website, www.sashaarcher.co.uk, and I have an events page on there with everything that I've got coming up. So yeah, there's a page that I've set up with the idea of running these healing creative workshops. That'll be focused on the community project, so you can follow that there. And I do the group healings from Space to Breathe in Leicestershire as well, so you can find me on their website. And I think that's it for now. Instagram, and I've just got myself on TikTok.
Looking forward to seeing you there. Are you still selling for the camera, for anyone working on watching on video, this, my Copolera, let me show this snake and rose, was made by Sasha. You can see it's in regular use. Are you still making and selling items like that?
Yes, but more on a made to order custom basis rather than on the shop on the website at the moment. And that's only because it takes, I love creating, but it obviously it takes a lot of time, and I'm working and have children at the moment. So, well, at the moment, probably forever. So yeah, I am still doing that work. But the other thing that also really helps me, I'm running out of time, but that's the other thing, is the creating really helped me. So that's something I'm bringing to others. So hopefully one day people can come and make their own copolera.
Oh, I wish we'd, yes. I feel that perhaps we need to come back and do a second episode, but I think that link to creativity, which I know is just so, even though we haven't really spoken about that much, like when I think of creativity, you're one of the people that comes to mind.
Yeah.
And yes, I think, again, there's people who, part of their medicine is being an artist of some kind. But again, I think that creative expression is part of being human, and something that's been so repressed in our modern culture, and is part of that healing path. So I'm glad we kind of like just managed to get that in.
Yeah.
So if and again, I would highly recommend, Sasha, if you are looking for, because I found it really hard to find something to use to burn herbs and resin and things. And so if someone is wanting something of that kind, you also do things like offering bowls. If they reach
Yeah.
out to you, you may well make one
Yeah.
especially for
I do
them.
have some still here, but I've just not been advertising so much on that
Okay.
front.
Yeah, they also make great presents. Well, I've also gifted a number of them to people too. Oh, Sasha, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story and your wisdom. It really is such a treat.
Oh, thank you.